thank you for coming to my little show here. I feel like I'm on stage and you're my audience. This is so cool. So my name is Guy Ringler, and I'm a fertility specialist with California Fertility Partners in Los Angeles, where I've been practicing for the last 29 years. It's hard to believe it, it goes by fast, but I feel very lucky to do what I do because I get to make babies and build families, and it's always interesting, exciting, and incredibly rewarding. And I've been helping gay men to have babies for over 20 years now. And it's incredible to see the changes our community has made, you know, in gay rights, the ability to have children and build families. I see men from around the world, and it's really beautiful. And to see the positive impact kids have had on their lives. And I have to warn you, when you have one, you're going to want another one because everyone loves their kids and their families so much. So I have a little flyer I put together. Sid, can you bring me one? On the 5 steps to build your family. Because when you come to conferences like this, it's a great resource fair, but it can be a little overwhelming. And so I've narrowed it down, isolated 5 steps to build your family. And I'm just going to walk you through this to help you. First of all, how many of you guys have ever had a semen analysis? Anyone? Excellent. Good job. The first thing you have to do when you go next week, call your doctor, tell them you want your sperm count checked. You want to know the quantity of sperm and the quality of the sperm. Because if there's any problem identified, it can take several months to boost your sperm count. We want to get the best possible sperm that we can. So if you need to be on vitamins and antioxidants, or if you need to see a urologist, we want to do that now. Step number 1, after you check your sperm count, is to freeze your sperm in Los Angeles. So you'll travel to LA, freeze your sperm, we'll do all the required FDA infectious disease testing on you, and then that sperm is cleared for use in the process when the egg donor comes through. We'll also do genetic carrier screening to see if you have any mutations for genetic disease. You're tested, your egg donor is tested, just to make sure that you don't share any mutations. And there's these great panels now we can test between 170 and 250 different diseases. The more extensive the panel, the more rare these diseases are. But it's all to prevent genetic disease in your children. So if you're a carrier for cystic fibrosis, you have to make sure the donor doesn't share that mutation, that you would select another donor. Step number 2 is to select your egg donor. And this is a really important part of the process because not only will the donor provide the genetics of your children, but her egg quality has a large impact on embryo quality and ultimately your success rates. When you're looking at egg donors, you will see first-time donors and repeat donors. I always try to encourage my patients to use a repeat donor because the agency can tell us how many eggs she made in a prior cycle, how many embryos were created, and whether a pregnancy resulted from that cycle. What I have seen over the years clinically is some egg donors make beautiful eggs and embryos every cycle, and others don't. So if we can use a proven donor, we can avoid the risk of a less than optimal outcome. When you're looking for an egg donor, you can really find whatever you're looking for in terms of ethnicity, hair color, eye color. You know, if you want someone with a musical background, you should search for that individual. You should never have to settle. You should never have to say, well, I can't really find anyone perfect, but she looks okay. You need to find the person that you really like. When you chose your partner, you just didn't take the first guy you met at the bar that night. So take your time to find the perfect donor. Once you select your donor, she'll complete her screening, and if she's a repeat donor, most of her medical screening will have already been completed. We'll just update her infectious disease screening. She'll sign her contracts, and we're ready to create embryos. Now, 10 years ago, we would never create embryos until we had a surrogate ready to allow for fresh embryo transfer, embryo into the surrogate. Today, the success rate in high-quality IVF labs with thawed frozen embryos are the same as fresh. So in our program, we freeze all embryos and do a frozen embryo transfer at a later date. So we've selected our egg donor. She signed all her contracts. She's completed her medical screening. We're going to create embryos. So my goal in the egg donor process is to retrieve somewhere between 25 and 30 eggs. The eggs are retrieved. They're inseminated with sperm. Fertilization rate with ICSI is about 75%. So we look at the embryos the day after egg retrieval. It's a fertilized egg or one-cell embryo. In our laboratory, we keep them undisturbed in culture until day 5. Between day 1 and day 5, that one-cell embryo will become a 100-cell embryo called a blastocyst. And we expect about 50 to 60% of those fertilized eggs to become blastocysts. Some will be so abnormal, they never make it to that stage. Once they become a blastocyst, we can freeze them directly, or we can biopsy them for genetic testing. It's called pre-implantation genetic testing. In that procedure, we remove 3 to 5 cells from the outer layer of this 100-cell embryo, freeze it, and send those cells to the genetics lab, and they will tell us whether or not that embryo contains the correct number of chromosomes. So we all have 46 chromosomes. 40% of those embryos from an egg donor will have an extra chromosome, be missing a chromosome, making them not viable, not capable of making a live birth. So genetic screening is a way to potentially increase success rates and lower miscarriage rates. It also tells you the gender of your embryos. So if that's important, we need to do genetic testing to identify the gender of the embryos. Step number 4 is to select your surrogate, and you may have done this earlier in the process. There's such demand for surrogates today that it can take 1 to 6 months to be matched with a surrogate. So you may want to get that started a little earlier. Once you're matched with the surrogate, she'll come to me to complete her medical screening. She has physical exam, uterine evaluation, infectious disease screening, to make sure she's going to provide this optimal environment, not only for getting pregnant, but for carrying that pregnancy to term. Once she's medically cleared, contracts are completed, and we're ready to plan a frozen embryo transfer. So her treatment is much simpler than the egg donor. She goes on hormones that mimic the hormonal changes of a natural cycle. On the appropriate day in her cycle, we'll thaw 1 or 2 embryos and transfer them into her uterus, and you can be there that day. In the procedure room, you'll see your embryos up on the video camera immediately before the transfer. And 10 days later, we have a positive pregnancy test. If we're doing a single embryo transfer, we see a positive pregnancy test about 75% of the time. If we transfer 2 embryos, it's about 80 to 85% of the time. So pregnancy rates are very high because these are the best possible conditions to start a pregnancy. Because we have young egg donors, we're carefully screening these embryos and putting this high quality embryo into this optimal environment provided by our surrogate mother. What's a little unique about our program compared to other programs is that at California Fertility Partners, when you're a patient of myself, I will see you at every visit. I will see your egg donor at every visit. I will see your surrogate at every visit. We don't have a doctor of the day. And I think the continuity of care that provides is very important because it allows me to fine-tune the process to give you the best possible outcome. And that's what our goal is. My goal is to help you have a baby, and ideally you want to do it in the first time. From the egg donor cycle, we should end up with somewhere between 4 and 10 normal embryos. So you have multiple attempts. But we don't want to run out of embryos. We want you to have a baby maybe complete your family from that one treatment cycle. You don't have to want to go through this multiple times. If we have 2 sperm providers, we're going to divide those eggs into 2 equal groups. So I retrieve 24 eggs, 18 are mature, each guy gets 9 eggs, 6 fertilize. Those 6 fertilized eggs are going to give you each 3 blastocysts, 40% are abnormal, so there's not a lot of extras. If the egg donor gives us 12 eggs and we have 2 sperm providers, it gets a little risky because somebody may end up with no normal embryos. If I'm monitoring your egg donor and she's making 8 to 10 eggs, I'm going to call you and say, I think we need to stop this cycle. Maybe we need to select another egg donor because she may not give you the optimal results that we're looking for. So my job is to help you get the best possible success rate through this process. Can I answer any questions? Yes? For most men, thawed frozen sperm is just as good as fresh. The only men that I want fresh sperm on are men with very low sperm counts, very poor sperm quality, because when you freeze and thaw sperm, you will lose some. So if you start with a very low number and you freeze it and thaw it, this embryologist may not have enough good sperm to identify. Otherwise, most men are fine freezing sperm in advance. Any other questions? In the back.
How long is the process of collecting eggs?
How long is the process? Well, once you identify the egg donor, she's screened. The treatment process is about 9 to 12 days, and the eggs are harvested. Other questions?
What are the practicalities or impracticalities of having donors from overseas or surrogates, let's say in Canada, not overseas, but donors from outside America and Canada and surrogates?
Donors can come from elsewhere. They need to complete their medical screening here in the U.S. They have to be able to understand the process. Hopefully English is our primary language. If not, we can have translators. They have to receive informed consent to make sure that they understand the process. And if they don't live in the area, the first half of their monitoring can be done elsewhere. The second half of their 2-week process, they need to be in Los Angeles because that's when I make all of the important decisions. Does that answer your question? It's similar for an egg donor who lives in New York City. The first 6 days, she can be monitored at a local program. They fax me all the data. The second half, I want to see her because I want to make the decisions based upon my data. I've had surrogates live in England. They fly over for the transfer. Surrogates from Australia, they fly over for the transfer and travel back. That shouldn't happen. Occasionally a donor will have a bad cycle. If she's a first-time donor, there's a blood test we can do called anti-Mullerian hormone that predicts how many eggs she'll make per cycle. So if she has a high AMH, she'll make a high number of eggs. If she has a low AMH, we're not going to approve her. Occasionally a donor will make fewer than expected, but if you have to stop that cycle and screen a repeat donor, then there's additional cost for screening the new donor. It's unusual with a proven donor to have to stop a cycle, but occasionally I've had to make that call. I had a donor that had responded beautifully previously, and she just wasn't responding. Upon questioning, she was on a 2-week juice cleanse. she was in starvation mode. Her ovaries just shut down. So we stopped that cycle. We restarted 2 months later. We didn't have to change donors, but it's all about getting you the best results. And if there's something unusual going on, then I'm gonna call you to let you know about it. Yes. I'm sorry, I did.
So once you have a confirmed pregnancy, what percentage of those results are?
The difference between, it depends if you're talking about a positive pregnancy test, a clinical pregnancy. A clinical pregnancy is where the patient is pregnant, we see a heartbeat on ultrasound. The difference between a clinical pregnancy rate and live birth is the fall off is somewhere between 5 and 10%. The embryos are all graded, so the embryologist prior to freezing them will grade the blastocysts. They have a numerical score, 2 to 6, and a letter grade A, B, C. The first letter, they're cutting me off here, refers to the grade of the inner cell mass, the fetal cells. Second letter is the placental cells, A being excellent, B being very good, C being average, D is poor quality. So we're going to select the highest quality grade embryo of the desired gender.